So do you know what proper posture is? In this video, I'm going to teach you the different posture deviances and how to correct those. Hey guys, my name is Brendan O'Neill. I'm the owner of Core Complex, which is a functional gym in St. Charles, Missouri. I've been a personal trainer as a full-time career since 2001. I've worked with anywhere from younger athletes all the way up to professional athletes. The basis of my training is to develop the core and integrate functional movement patterns to make sure people move and function properly, whether outside in everyday life or in their sport. Today we're going to talk about posture. And first, understanding what resting posture is. So when I look at an athlete or I look at a client, I want to look at their resting posture. And the reason being is because the body is always trying to take stress off of its system. And if it has a tight muscle or tight muscle fibers, at rest, example for the chest, at rest the body's going to pull the two attachment points closer together to take stress off that muscle while it's at rest. Well, if that does that and it pulls the shoulders forward, well, it's going to lengthen the muscles on the opposite side of the joint because you can't have tight muscles on both sides. If there's a tight muscle, it's going to force the muscles on the opposite side of the joint to become weak. So we start to look at resting posture to get a base to understand where the movement is going to come from. Because if your posture is off, you're guaranteed to have your movement patterns off. Because posture is the starting and ending point of all movements. So let's get into just a few of those posture deviances that we can develop. We're going to start with the upper body posture. This is called an upper cross syndrome. And this is a very, very common posture deviance amongst most of our society, especially if you sit at a desk. And an upper cross syndrome is what we call a depressed rib angle, so you increase your thoracic curve. At the same time, your shoulders are going to fall forward, and because your chest drops, your head falls forward. So what this does, it reduces your cervical curve, and it increases your thoracic curve, tightens all the muscles of the chest and the abdominals, and the neck. This can, over time, lead to a lot of neck issues, a lot of head issues like headaches and migraines, but also it weakens the shoulder, which can weaken all your pressing and pulling movements because your shoulder or your mid-back is a position for where you push and pull from. So an upper cross syndrome, again, would be a lot of tightness in front of your system and a lot of weakness in the back. So how we would want to correct that is by forcing yourself to stretch out your chest, stretch out your abdominals, learn to do neck stretches, and at the same time work on posture correction exercises to reteach the body to pull itself back to neutral position. And this again is very important because you got to think about this. With all posture positions, we're always working against gravity. And gravity is always trying to pull us straight to the floor. And from a side view, if you would look, and I'm stacked tall, the ear should be stacked over the shoulder, which should be stacked over the hip, which should be stacked over the ankle, which transfer our stress right into the floor. But once we fall in front of our midline, and your midline is actually the front edge of your ankle or the center of your arch, as soon as you fall in front of your midline, you're like a brick building trying not to fall over all day. So gravity is trying to pull you down and all the muscles on the back of your system are just holding you up. Almost be like walking around holding a dumbbell all day. Over time, those muscles are going to get trigger points, they're going to get sore and achy, and start to lead to a lot of injuries. So upper cross syndrome, one of the things you want to look at because it's a very, very common posture deviance. It's kind of hard to look at yourself from the side. So one way you can do that from a front view is look where your hands are positioned. At a proper posture position, the shoulders should be level and your hands should be to your side, palms facing in. But if your palms are rotated in front of your pockets, where you see the elbow pit turned in, this shows an internal rotation of your humerus or your arm, which shows tight internal rotators. At the same time, you're going to know the external rotators and the mid-back are going to be weak. So look at your hand positions, look at your resting position. Do you have one shoulder lower than the other? This will show if you're right-handed, and especially if you sit at a desk, you're going to be writing more, you're going to be using your mouse more. So a lot of times you're going to have a little bit more forward position on your dominant side. So it's pretty hard to identify your posture deviances within yourself, especially because you see yourself every day. So sometimes it's good to find somebody else that can help you with that, a professional such as myself. Let's go into the lower body posture deviances. These are 3 different ones. We're going to start with the first one. It's called an anterior tilt. Now before we get into that, I want you to understand that we all should have a natural anterior tilt. Guys, we have about a 5 to 7 degree tilt between 2 points of the pelvis. Females about a 7 to 10 degree tilt. But if we get overextended, and this will become by tight hip flexors. Hip flexors are muscles that flex the hip. And when these become short and tight, or if the lower back becomes short and tight, it pulls you into what we call an anterior tilt. Now, when these muscles tighten up, it increases your lumbar curve, and it forces your hip joints to fully compact here in your hip joint. At the same time, it lengthens your abdominals, it lengthens your glutes, and it lengthens your hamstrings. So again, how do we correct that? We want to stretch the tight muscles and strengthen and shorten the long, weak muscles. So from here, we'd want to stretch out our hip flexors and lower back and start strengthening the lower abs and the glutes and hamstrings to pull ourselves back to neutral position. One thing you need to understand is you can't have tight muscles on both sides of the joints. I know I already said that. So before you start strengthening the weak muscles, you have to start lengthening the tight muscles, because the body won't let the joints migrate into neutral position unless there's equal tension on both sides of the joints. So you kind of look at anterior, kind of look at Donald Duck. Donald Duck walked around anterior. What did Pink Panther do? He walked around posterior. So posterior is exact opposite. Posterior is when you have a high tension on the hamstrings that attach to your butt bone here, called your ischial tuberosity. And when there's high tension, it's just going to pull that hip down into what we call posterior position. In a posterior position, we have a short, tight hamstring or short glutes, and it's also going to force the lower abdominals to become short at the same time. With this, the main problem with this is you reduce your lumbar curve. So as your hip pulls down, you don't only lengthen the muscles of the lower back, but you actually reduce the lumbar curve. And when you reduce that curve, it starts to open up the disc in the back to become a posterior bulging disc. Especially if you get an impact, it can shoot the disc right back out your lower back. Very extreme condition, but that can happen, and that's usually what contributes to that. So we become long and weak in the lower back, we reduce our lumbar curve, and we lengthen the muscles that flex the hip. So this creates a lot of instability around your SI joints, your pelvis, which can create all types of dysfunction through your squatting patterns, your bending or deadlift patterns, and your running patterns. And the third one is basically the posterior tilt, but you tend to go into a sway position. And a sway back, and this usually is coupled with upper cross. The upper cross, the body falls in front of the midline, and for the body to catch the weight of the chest, it's going to kick the hip under. And this is the most common one we see. When people relax and they stand like this, they have overlax hip flexors. Their hip flexors are extremely weak. So you're not only tightening your hamstrings and weakening your hip flexors, but they become so weak, they let the hip just sway in front of the midline. And this creates a lot of lower back issues. It really weakens the glutes and jams up your SI joints, which will create a lot of sciatic issues down through your hips. So how would you correct that? Well, for the posterior tilt and the sway back position, you're going to need to loosen up your hamstrings. You can stretch out the abs a little bit, but the abs usually are not the ones that will cause that tilt. It's going to be because you have a lot of tightness in the big mass of the muscles in the back of the leg. So posture is extremely important. Again, I'm going to say this because it's the beginning and ending of all movements. So if your posture's off, your movement patterns are definitely going to be off. And if you're a professional athlete or a competitive athlete, you got to make sure you're functional. You got to be able to make sure your body's moving properly, because when there's imbalances throughout the system, it's just going to create what we call power leaks. Your body performs as a system, and everything should work in conjunction with each other. Your hips work with your shoulders and vice versa. They create movement. And when you have a weakness in your movement or a weakness in your posture, it's what we call a power leak. It's a power leak in your performance, and it's a power leak in your movements. So learn how to identify where your posture deviances are. And then once you kind of figure those out, focus on really stretching out those tight muscles. And at the same time, once you start to get a little bit of extensibility and flexibility in those, start to work on shortening and strengthening the long, weak muscles in the opposite side of the joint. So guys, I hope that gave you a little bit of information on the importance of posture. That should be one of the first things you put in your program. A lot of guys, and I don't want to say guys, but a lot of people don't like to stretch. They don't like to take time to slow things down and work on stretching techniques and posture techniques because they're boring. And you only have 60 minutes. You just want to get in the gym and you want to hammer it out. But again, if you're training for performance, or you just want to train to make sure you don't have aches and pains every day, learn how to correct your posture.
Thanks for watching. Links are in the description below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We have other videos over here, and check out helixsports.com.